Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at a new-ish dragon deck, I suppose, and that is because Illusion Strike Dragon Miragiastar has just got a brand new fusion from the new deck build box, the Hazy Strike Dragon Miragiastar F. There have been a couple of builds going around, some of them basically juggling how many different boss monsters they want to be using. The list we're looking at today was heavily inspired by world's competitor Parko's list that he piloted to win Qunatum Rush. So this list is already kind of proven itself to be reasonably strong. But as you might notice, this list isn't actually that different from the original Miragiastar list that has been floating around, that has been seen play for several months. So the idea behind this deck is we play the Miragiastar Nova skill, we play the 3 copies of the Dragius, we play the Dragon, we do everything we were always doing, we still can go into our Hyper Strike Dragon Miragiastar F as our primary boss monster, but now we can also use Illusion Strike Dragon Miragiastar to go into our Hazy Strike Dragon Miragiastar F and use this as kind of an alternate boss monster because it is a little bit different. So what does this new boss monster do? So it's made using the Dragon and Illusion Strike Dragon Miragiastar, and because it uses the Dragon, that means we can just use the Miragiastar Nova skill because the skill basically searches the Dragon and Fusion, which are 2 things that we do need for our new boss monster. But we can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard, make up to 3 face-up monsters on your opponent's field, lose 1500 attack until the end of this turn. This turn, this card can make up to 2 attacks on monsters, or this turn, this card can attack directly. So 3000 direct attack is a really good way to close out games. But what we did find was more often than not we were using the first effect to reduce the attack of our opponent's monsters and then attack over them, which is pretty strong. Usually this will easily be able to clear the opponent's board, and if your opponent does have 2 1500 or less attack monsters, we can just use this to close the game because we reduce both of them down to 0, we attack twice, so we attack both times for 3000 damage, which is going to be lethal. So this is one build of the deck. As you can see, we're playing the 3 copies of Star Replacer, we've got the 3 Fortitude Dragons, we're playing the Winged Dragon Guardian of the Fortress. This card has better attack plus defense stats because it has a total of 26, which means it's good against decks that want to flip your guy's face up, but also is reasonably okay against cards that have piercing because we still have that 1200 defense. And you can see we have this myriad of trap cards, including card restoration. But there is one more build that we've been playing, which I would argue is a bit more fun. And this is that build. I would consider this build a little bit more fun because we are playing the 3 copies of the Illusion Strike Dragon Miragiastar, which means we do get to actually summon the Miragiastar F a bit more often. This build is a little bit more high roll, and as such I feel like could be a little bit less consistent, but this build is based off of David22's list that he did use to top the same Qunatum Rush tournament that Parko did win. So arguably this deck is weaker just based on results, but when it comes to tournaments the results don't always tell the whole story. But I do think this deck is very, very fun. It is a bit high roll, right? We're playing more higher level monsters, which means the deck can brick a little bit easier. Illusion Strike Dragon Miragiastar is a flawed boss monster, but we'll get into that in a sec. But I think first things first, we should talk about the skill Miragiastar Nova. So, can be activated if all the monsters in your constructed deck are dragon type monsters and all of the monsters in your constructed extra deck are high dragon monsters. Multi-choice effect, we can make the attack of 1 face-up level 7 light attribute monster in your field with 2600 or less attack become 2700. So notably this does not work with Miragiastar because Miragiastar is a dark monster. This will still work with Dragius. Or, if the total attack of the face-up level 5 or higher monsters in your opponent's field is 1400, 2800, or 4200 or more, add 1, 2, or 3 the Dragon and or Fusion from your deck or graveyard to your hand. The Dragon only once per duel. So we can use this to get our Dragon, which a lot of the time we can just use this as a body. We won't actually be able to make a fusion play realistically off this, but we can still get the body to just summon and then tribute it off to get out one of our boss monsters if we are bricking a little bit. But primarily we really want to use this to get the Dragon to be used as fusion material, and then there is Fusion. And again, we can get Fusion back every single turn. What some people have been doing is running 2 copies of the Fusion spell card. That way you can use it as discard fodder for things like 7 Shift that we will get to in a minute. So it is pretty cool. So, going through the card by card, we'll start out with the Illusion Strike Dragon Miragiastar. So we can send 1 level 7 higher dragon type monster from our hand to the graveyard. Okay, so we're playing 5 total. Obviously you can't discard itself, so we've got 4 targets for this in the deck. Up to 2 face-up level 7 or lower monsters in your opponent's field lose 1500 attack until the end of this turn. Now, the big problem with this is it's level 7 and lower. And what we found during testing was there are so many decks right now that are not playing level 7 and lower, or aren't getting them on the field that often. We played against a lot of Dark Galaxy, which are primarily level 8. We played against Cyber Dragon, which are primarily level 8 and higher monsters. Anytime your opponent gets out a fusion monster, such as Metarions, again, it will not work on those fusion monsters. It doesn't work on maximums. There is just so much this effect doesn't work on that whenever it does work, you kind of feel like you've just got a little bit lucky that you're playing an opponent that has 7 and lower monsters that they're going to leave in attack mode, and that they actually got them out at the same time that we had Miragiastar access with its effect live, so it's a little bit awkward. But the rest of its effect is this turn, if this card destroyed a monster by battle, it can make a second attack on a monster during the battle phase. So it can't attack directly, that is a Dragius only thing. But this is actually okay. There are some situations where you can just hit your opponent for 5,000 damage, as you'll probably see in one of the replays. Our opponent did just leave two 1,500 attack monsters. We summon it out, we reduce both their attack to 0, we slam over both. 5,000 direct damage is really, really good. So this card, like we say, not very reliable, but very, very high roll and very, very fun. Then we have Dragius. I mean, what more is there to say about this card? So then took it to the graveyard. This turn, if it destroyed a monster, it can make a second attack, and that attack can be direct. And this is obviously a card that we can boost with our skill up to that 27, and we can use this as fusion material to go into our Miragiastar, which can get double attack and piercing, or 2 attacks on monsters, but gains 900 attack. So again, really, really powerful boss monster. And we did actually find we were going into Miragiastar F a little bit more than we were going into the Miragiastar F, but both still very, very strong options. Next up, we have Phoenix Dragon, which is now at limit 1. So basically, we're now restricted to either using this or the Rice Terrace Secure. Now, Rice Terrace is still really good into a lot of decks. For example, it's really good into Psychic, it's really good into Dark Galaxy. There are just some decks that it's really, really strong into, but Phoenix Dragon is really, really useful. First off, it lets us get to our fusions easier by giving us easy access to our boss monsters. Second, we can use it to get dragons into our hand to fuel Illusion Strike Dragon Miragias's effect, which is also really, really good. So Phoenix Dragon, again, we'd really like to have Rice, but I do think Phoenix Dragon is worth it. It is very, very powerful. Then we're playing 2 copies of Fortitude Dragon. I don't know if we should go up to 3, but I think if we're going to take out anything to get this up to 3, it would be Dragosite, but Fortitude Dragon at 2 is still fine. So again, okay stats. 1100 defense is quite nice against piercing, which again, Dark Galaxy exists, Ancient Gear Golem exists. There is a lot of piercing in the meta still. But we can send the top card of a deck to the graveyard. One face-up monster with 2,000 or more attack on your opponent's field loses 400 attack until the end of this turn. Then we can set a Dragon's Fortitude from our graveyard to our spell and trap zone. And we are actually playing Dragon's Fortitude because it is now limit 2, which is actually kind of nice. So we can actually use the entirety of this effect. Next up, we have Triad Drago. So if your opponent has a face-up level 7 or higher monster and you have 2 face-up non-level 3 dragons on your field, draw a card. Now, the only level 3s in here are itself, so as long as it has multiple copies itself, we can always get this draw. But you have to remember that your fusion monsters are high dragons, so you won't be able to use them in combination with Triad Drago. But typically, we want to just summon this out, get the draw, and then immediately tribute it off for one of our boss monsters. Just getting that free +1 can be really, really strong. So Triad Drago, absolutely fantastic, and again, 1300 defense, really nice. The big weakness, obviously, it has low attack value, which is not great, and it does have quite heavy restrictions. For example, we can't use this effect unless our opponent has a 7 or higher monster. So if they do have kind of a relatively okay board, but it's all 6s and below, we still can't do anything with it. Next up, we have 2 copies of Star Replacer, and this card's actually pretty cool. So if we have no other monsters on the field, we can return this card from our field to the hand. Then special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your graveyard face down defense position, but you cannot special summon monsters from your hand or graveyard for the rest of this turn. So this card can be a bit awkward because it does conflict with 7 shift being able to special summon a monster from the hand. Other than that, it's pretty much fine. Star Replacer can get a bit awkward though, because the monster we bring back has to be face down, which means we can't use its effect, we also can't flip it up. It also means that we won't be able to use it with Triad Drago, because if we summon this out and then we get Triad Drago's effect off, we will have more than one monster, so Star Replacer won't be on. Or if we use Star Replacer, the monster summon will be face down, which means we won't have 3 face-up non-level 3 dragon-type monsters, which is very, very awkward. So it can conflict a little bit, but being able to just get that free plus to get out your tribute monsters is really, really strong. So Star Replacer still, fantastic card. Next up, we have 3 Dragosite. Again, 1500 defense is nothing to sneer at. It's really, really good. Again, 0 attack does kind of suck. So if your opponent is playing like the Flap Dragon, if your opponent's playing Meteor Charge to change your guys to attack, then this can be quite punishable. But outside of those situations, still having a 1500 defender, really, really good. Then we've got 3 copies of the dragon. Some people were cutting this down to 2 copies, but I do think having 3 copies is especially good in this build because we are playing the star restart, which we'll get to in a minute. The dragon is quite vulnerable. 0 attack, 0 defense is awful. If your opponent has piercing, you can take so much damage when this card gets attacked. If your opponent can flip this card face up, again, they're going to get in for just so much damage. So the dragon's stats really suck, but it's an integral combo piece of the deck. Next up, we're playing Pot of Greed, and Pot of Greed is in here because it's just a 3+2. This deck doesn't really need to shuffle cards back into your deck, realistically, to make it work. Just getting that 3+2 can be really, really good, and oftentimes we don't want to only have the conditional get +2 when we have a chance to go for lethal. Getting more cards into your hand is obviously really good because this is effectively a combo deck. We do need to find the fusion, we do need to find the dragon, we do need to find the boss monsters, and we do need to find additional copies of the boss monsters if we want to use Miragiastar's effect. Next up, we have 7 Shift. I've seen some people play multiple copies of 7 Shift. We've been experimenting with one. We haven't tried any more than one just yet, but so far it's been okay. So we can send 1 card from our hand to the graveyard to special summon a level 7 or lower effect monster from your hand face up to your field. So this basically just gets out one of our bosses, which can set up some quite interesting plays where we could, for example, summon out a Miragiastar, then summon out a Dragius, and then kind of try and push for a very quick lethal. So this deck can be very explosive, and this is part of why this deck feels a little bit high roll. Next up, we have 2 copies of Dragon's Inferno. I personally prefer running 3, but we've been going with 2 because both Paco and David run 2, so we wanted to test out how it felt. Realistically, we weren't really using Dragon's Inferno all that much. Usually we would set it and then our opponent would pop our Dragon's Inferno. We wouldn't really get to use it, so we didn't really feel any difference between running 2 or 3, but it's still up for debate. Then there's Star Restart. Because we're only playing 2 copies of Dragius, we can play the newly limited 3 Star Restart. Now, Star Restart is a bit of a weird one because it's good if we have enough resources to make 2 fusions, but a lot of the time I feel like we don't need it because our skill gets us the fusion anyway. And the dragon is a card that we should already have relatively easy access to, and the skill will get us to it once. So for me, Star Restart feels like it's good if you're going to summon out 2 fusions at once, which sometimes feels like it's a bit of a tall order and unrealistic to happen. Personally, I didn't feel like Star Restart did much in testing, but again, this is the list that David was playing. This is a card that he was using, so we thought we'd test it out. So far, unremarkable to me. Then there's 1 copy of Talismanic Seal Array. I don't know, again, if we want to bump this number up. If we do, something else would have to come out. Talismanic Seal Array is still just a fantastic card. Lets us clear over things, lets us recycle cards. Again, we don't need to do too much recycling, but a little bit of recycling isn't going to hurt. Then there's the Fusion. Like we were saying, some people have been using 2 copies of this card, so there is potentially something there. We've only been testing out the 1. We will still have to test the double Fusion build in the future. Then there's Buffered Slime. Again, absolutely fantastic trap card. This card is almost always live against every deck, even though it's not always live against every monster. For example, Metarion doesn't really do a ton against them. Against Psychic, we're not going to be able to flip this up when Candy Live declares an attack, but we can against every other monster. So there is some awkwardness, and especially with this current meta, as we see the dragon start to rise in popularity, again, we can't use it when these fusion dragons attack. Next up, Widespread Ruin. Widespread Ruin is actually quite interesting because Widespread Ruin is actually quite decent into Ancient Gear Golem. It is also really good into both Dragiastar and Miragiastar. So because this deck has been quite popular on the ladder lately, Widespread Ruin has actually gained a lot of value, on top of the fact it is not limited, which means we can play 2 copies of Dragon's Fortitude, which is now limit 2. So Dragon's Fortitude, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, 1 attacking monster loses attack equal to the level of 1 dragon type monster in your graveyard times 100. So ideally this will be a level 7, we can reduce it by 700. Then shuffle that monster from your graveyard into the deck, so then we get to recycle our boss monster back into our deck, which again is really good. So what are my thoughts and opinions about this deck? So this deck is really fun. When it all comes together, it is really, really explosive. It can just end games out of nowhere. We have a really strong strategy in getting out the Hyper Strike Dragon Dragiastar F and the Hazy Strike Dragon Miragiastar F, which are just absolutely fantastic boss monsters. The skill is also really, really strong. The only real negative about this deck, in my opinion, is just how many boss monsters we play and how few ways we have to actually get the boss monsters out. So we are playing stuff like 7 Shift, but 7 Shift isn't always live. If we find 7 Shift but don't find our boss monsters, it's a dead card. If we find all of our boss monsters before we find 7 Shift, again, it becomes a bit of a dead card. So it can get a little bit awkward. And in our experience, this deck did feel a little bit clunky. It did feel like there were several games where we'd open 2, maybe 3 boss monsters and be a little bit bricked up and not necessarily be able to play the game. But when that didn't happen, when we actually got to sit down and play, the deck felt very, very explosive. Again, a big thing that did happen quite a lot is we would have access to Miragiastar, and our opponent would not have level 7 or lower monsters, so we'd kind of sit there and look at it and go, well, I can try and use this for a fusion, but on its own, Miragiastar effect is going to do absolutely nothing, which can be a bit awkward if we don't have easy access to the dragon, so can get a bit tricky, but still very fun. I think the deck is still very strong. It has won a tournament, it has topped tournaments, so this is definitely a competitive list at the very least. But let's find some replays so I could show you what I've been talking about.